Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Dining with the Departed, where we talk about famous or infamous people who have passed. We discuss their lives, their careers, what they're famous or infamous for, and then I show you and taste their favorite food. I'm Stacey Lee. Let's begin. Kurt Donald Cobain was born February 20th, 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington, to Wendy Elizabeth, who was a waitress, and Donald Leland Cobain, who was an auto mechanic. Kurt had a lot of musicians in his family, classically trained musicians, jazz musicians, and they encouraged Kurt's love of music from an early age. He started singing at age 2, and by age 4, he was playing the piano and writing songs. When Kurt was 9 years old, his parents divorced, and the divorce had a strong effect on him. His mother said his personality changed quite dramatically. Kurt became withdrawn and defiant. Kurt later said that he felt ashamed of his family and that he wanted a normal family. This was something that bothered him, although I feel like divorced parents are as much the norm as married ones now. Kurt's father married a woman who at first Kurt liked, but then grew to resent. His mother married an abusive man who at one point broke her arm. His mother refused to press charges, and Kurt was very angry about that. Kurt became angry in general. He acted out with adults, and he began bullying another boy at school. So his parents took him to see a therapist, who determined that Kurt needed to live with one parent and stop going back and forth. Kurt's father got full custody, and soon he was overwhelmed with Kurt's bad behavior. Kurt's father then kind of pawned him off on a friend's family, the Reeds. They were born-again Christians, and Kurt converted. He later renounced religion, but claimed spirituality was a large part of his life. The song Lithium is actually about Kurt's experience living with the Reed family. Kurt wasn't interested in sports. He didn't love school either, and he was usually drawing during all of his classes. He particularly liked drawing human anatomy. His second year of high school, he went to live with his mother. 2 weeks before graduation, Kurt found out he didn't have enough credits to graduate, so he just quit going. His mother told him that he had to get a job or move out of the house. Not even 2 weeks later, Kurt came home to find all of his belongings packed in boxes, and his mother threw him out of the house. Yeah, I'm not going to say much here because I don't have anything nice to say. Throwing your kid out of the house just 10 days or so after he finds out he's not going to graduate. Yeah, I got nothing nice to say there. I just feel strongly that if you bring a child into the world, it is your responsibility to care for that child. And that responsibility doesn't end the nanosecond they turn 18 or graduate from high school. That's my opinion. Kurt was, in fact, homeless for a while. He stayed with friends and occasionally would sneak into his mother's basement for a safe place to sleep. In late 1986, Kurt got a job at the Polynesian Resort and made enough money to get an apartment. He started going to concerts in Olympia, Washington. Lots and lots of concerts. Kurt had met Chris Novoselic in high school, and they often played music together. After asking Chris several times, Kurt was able to convince him to form a band, which they did. Nirvana was born. At first, the band had little success. They went through a lot of drummers. Finally, they met up with Chad Channing, and the trio of Kurt, Chris, and Chad recorded Nirvana's first album, Bleach. Kurt became dissatisfied with Chad's playing and fired him. The band then hired Dave Grohl, and the new trio recorded Nevermind. I could sit here for hours and talk about Nirvana. There will be people that tell you that Kurt wasn't as prolific a songwriter as he's been made out to be. There are people that will say that technically, musically, they weren't the greatest band. None of that matters to me. What matters to me is the music. I remember the exact location that I was at the first time I heard Nirvana for the first time. I remember the car I was driving. I remember the spot in the road that I was on. I remember absolutely everything about that moment. I knew I was hearing something completely new and completely different, and I have not had that experience since. So that's what matters to me, the music and the emotion and the memories that it evokes. I don't care much for talk about who can play the fastest finger pattern on a guitar or who can play in 7/8 time on the drums. Those things just aren't what matter to me about music. What matters to me is how I feel about it. And for me, there will never ever be another band like Nirvana. Nevermind, of course, produced the huge hit Smells Like Teen Spirit, and that song catapulted Nirvana into the white-hot spotlight of rock stardom. I think it was either Bret Michaels or Vince Neil that told this story, and I saw it on like a VH1 Behind the Music episode. But they said that they arrived to their record label's building and, they're in the skin tight pants with the big hair and the makeup. And they walked into the record company's building and started to walk down the hall. And there were these great big posters of the biggest bands of the day. And their picture had been taken down. And in place of their pictures was this picture of this kind of grungy looking sad guy in a cardigan sweater, kind of somberly looking at his guitar, and he had dirty sneakers on and ripped jeans. And either Vince Neil or Bret Michaels, whoever it was that was telling the story, said, the minute I saw that photo going up, that was the antithesis of everything that we were, I knew our career was over. Isn't that a great story? And it was true. It was a hard shift in the music world. And I don't think we've seen anything like that since. That's kind of a good thing. Everything's popular now. Any genre of music is popular now, but it hasn't always been that way. It used to be this was cool and then this was not cool. There was a hard line in the sand, and I think it's a good thing that it's not like that anymore. Grunge took over the country and then it took over the world. It was an entirely new genre of music, unlike anything we had ever heard before. There really hasn't been anything like that phenomenon again. There have been subgenres of music, variations on something that already exists, but we haven't had an entirely new genre emerge since grunge, and Nirvana was at the spearhead. Immediately, Kurt Cobain began to struggle with his newfound mega fame. He was a very political person. He was an advocate for gay rights, for women's rights, for abortion rights, and against racism. He'd even play gay rights events, which was something that he received criticism for. He got death threats from anti-abortion activists, with one threatening to shoot him as he stepped on stage at a pro-choice event. Kurt Cobain was a drug user. This was the time of heroin, and if you were in the music business, there was a good chance you were using drugs. Kurt struggled with his addictions, and he struggled with his fame, and he was just generally not a terribly happy person. I'm always shocked when someone like Chris Cornell or Chester Bennington take their own lives and people are surprised. Where do you think those lyrics come from? Those dark lyrics that those guys write over and over and over. As a songwriter, not every song that I write is from my own personal experience. But when you have an artist that all they write is really dark, macabre, black stuff, that's coming from a place of pain. That's coming from somewhere. And so I'm never really surprised when those kinds of artists end their lives, because I know they're writing from a place of darkness and turmoil. It's personal to them. In 1993, Nirvana released In Utero. Again, I could sit here for hours and gush about this album. People will make the argument that Nirvana was overhyped. They weren't a technical band, because their songs are, for the most part, quite simple. I'm going to make the exact opposite argument. Any artist can hide behind layers and layers of sound and effects and production. When you get three guys on a stage that can bang out simple songs and they sound fantastic, they touch you, they move you, that is what great music is all about. That is what artistry is all about. There are so many great songs on In Utero. Again, I'll stop before I start, because if I get going, I'll keep going on and on. Kurt's personal life, a lot of this depends on who you ask. There are varying accounts as to how he met Courtney Love. To be honest, I've worried about covering Kurt Cobain just because of Courtney Love. She's a very controversial figure and such a point of contention. But hey, it is what it is, and I don't think we will ever know the truth. The general consensus is that the two met in 1991 and that they bonded over their love of drugs. On February 24th, 1992, Kurt and Courtney were married in Waikiki on the beach. Courtney wore a dress owned by Frances Farmer, the actress that Kurt had kind of a fixation with, and Kurt wore green plaid pajamas because he didn't feel like putting on a tux. 6 months later, the couple's daughter, Frances Bean, was born. Kurt Cobain openly discussed the fact that he considered himself bisexual, although there isn't a lot of evidence he ever had relationships with men. Kurt had chronic bronchitis, and he also had a stomach condition that caused him a lot of pain. He claims that the stomach condition is how he first started using painkillers, and that led to heroin usage and addiction. Kurt's family has a long history of mental illness, and he has 2 uncles who committed suicide with a gun. In 1992, Kurt's drug use started to affect his career. He fell asleep in the middle of a photo shoot, and his playing began to suffer. Kurt claimed his stomach pain got worse, and so his drug usage was worse. People around him claimed that the stomach pain was an excuse to use drugs, and that the drugs made the stomach issues much worse. Nirvana played as the musical guest on Saturday Night Live in 1992. The morning after that performance, Kurt Cobain suffered an overdose. He didn't even go to the hospital. Courtney Love was prepared with naloxone. She injected Kurt, and he went on as if nothing had happened. I could sit here for a very long time and talk about the artistry and the importance of Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. The problem is, here on YouTube, I can't play you any of their music. I want to play you their music as we discuss his craft, but I can't. So I've decided to stick with a sketch of his life and biography. But what I think of him as an artist, I think he was one of a kind, and I don't think we will ever see anyone like him again. In March of 1994, Kurt fell ill. He sought medical treatment in Rome. Courtney flew in to meet him. The morning after she arrived, she found Kurt overdosed on champagne and Rohypnol. He was rushed to the hospital and treated. After 5 days, he flew home to Seattle. On March 18, 1994, Courtney Love contacted the Seattle Police Department, telling them that Kurt was suicidal and he had locked himself in a room with a gun. Police arrived and took all of Kurt's guns from him. They also confiscated some pills. Courtney then arranged an intervention with the couple's friends. Kurt got very, very angry at this intervention and locked himself in his room. But by the end of the day, his friends were able to talk him into seeking treatment. He went to Exodus Recovery in Los Angeles. The staff were never told that Kurt was suicidal. This was something that had been kept from the public. Courtney visited him in recovery and brought their daughter to see him as well. It was the last time that Kurt would ever see his daughter. The next day, Kurt walked outside of the recovery home to have a cigarette. He then climbed the 6-foot fence and took a cab to the airport. He flew back home to Seattle. Kurt then wandered around Seattle for the next couple of days. There were sightings of him here and there, but no one could get in touch with him and no one knew where he was. Courtney hired a private investigator to find him, but the PI never found Kurt. No one did until it was too late. At some point in time, Kurt made his way back here to his home in Seattle. This is where the story turns into lore. There are so many versions of what then took place that I could never cover them all, but the official story is as follows. On April 8, 1994, an electrician working at Kurt's house installing a security system found Kurt Cobain dead. At first, the electrician thought Kurt was asleep in the middle of the floor, but as he got closer, he saw a small trickle of blood coming from Kurt's ear, and then he saw the shotgun laying on the chest pointed at his chin. The coroner's report said Kurt had been dead for about 3 days, and he had enough heroin in his system to kill 3 men. The world was stunned to learn that one of the biggest stars on earth was dead, that he had taken his own life. I remember the day so well. People were shaken. Everywhere I went, people were crying. It was all over the news. We didn't have the internet at that time, but it was all people were talking about. There were vigils and memorials and tributes, and then came the conspiracy theories. I won't go into those today, but if you're curious, all you have to do is hit up Google. Kurt Cobain was only 27 years old when he died. I don't even know how many times I've sat and thought about the fact that we only got 3 albums from him, not including the live albums. I wonder what more he would have given us. I wonder how his style would have changed, and I think about all of the poetry that was never written. I think about his daughter and how much he seemed to genuinely love her, and I wonder why that love wasn't enough to keep him alive. It's a very sad story about a very sad man who just never really found his place in this world. So, what was Kurt Cobain's favorite food? I'm going to show you. Are you ready for this? Kraft Macaroni and Cheese. And you know what? Who could blame him? Kraft Macaroni and Cheese is something I have been in love with since I was a little kid. I grew up in a household that the kids on TikTok now call an ingredient household. They have names for everything. There's almond moms, there's ingredient households. I grew up in an ingredient household. My mother cooked every day. We did not have TV dinners. We did not have chips. We did not have candy. We had ingredients to make something with. My sisters and I would sometimes eat cake batter because it was like the only sweet thing in our house. Like my mom would have like a cake mix in the cupboard. We did not grow up with junk food, but I knew friends that did, and they always had macaroni and cheese. So I told my grandma Chamberlain about macaroni and cheese, and every time I went over to her house, guess what she made me? So Grandma Dean, this one is for you as well. I have always loved Kraft Macaroni and Cheese. It's good. It's fantastic. It's sticky. It's glutinous. It's cheesy. It's not terribly flavorful. I always put a little salt in mine. The salt helps bring out the flavor a little bit. But it is delicious and it's comforting. And I can see why somebody with stomach problems, this might be one of the things that didn't bother their stomach, because it is pretty mellow. I know people that hate it when people scrape their teeth on the fork, but it's really the only way you can get this stuff off. Here, I'll try it. Well, Kurt, wherever you are, I'm hoping that the stomach pain is gone, and I'm hoping that you can still get macaroni and cheese, because yeah, life without mac and cheese would not be that great. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Departed. Hit the like button if you liked the video, and subscribe to my channel if you want to support me. You can also support me by joining my Patreon, and there will be some bonus content for you there. The end goal on Patreon is to raise money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that can't be tested because there's no money to test it. We want to help with that, and you can be a part of it. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.